All right, we are continuing our series, Kohelet and the Good Life, Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. And today's topic is Things Are Seldom What They Seem. In other words, we're continuing the stories that we began last time when we talked about different illustrations of people who have good things, and yet something is causing them not to be able to enjoy that. So we had two stories last time. You remember there was a story of a man who had great riches, and yet when his wealth grew, so did the number of mouths to feed, the number of people who were there to keep good account, to offer advice, to consult, and as a result, he made more money, but he had to spend more money because of the people who were there leeching on, let's say that. And then there was a second story that we had last time, a man who gathered together wealth and then lost it all in a bad venture. And you remember that then he had no inheritance to hand on to his son. So what we're talking about is wisdom has judged cases in which people have achieved things, but then there is some loss, there's some mitigating circumstances that is taking away from the full enjoyment. So we have two more stories today. We have a man who achieves great things, everything his heart desires, and then doesn't enjoy them. And then we have the story of a man of 1,000 people. We'll take a look at that. And then we'll have some proverbs to wrap up and learn not to dispute with God. These four stories that we have conclude with each of these situations is vanity and a grievous evil. So let's talk about our first story. Here's a man, it says, who has wealth and possessions and honor, and he lacks nothing of all that he desires. So imagine that. He has put together in such a way, by wisdom, he has found great wealth. Everything that his heart desires, nothing is lacking. God has given him everything that is the desire of his heart, and yet the ability to enjoy those things, the passage says, has been withheld by God. In other words, there is the wealth and the possessions, but not the ability to enjoy them. And in fact, the passage says the person who is enjoying them is a stranger. The word stranger is significant because normally we do work for our own benefit so that we might enjoy the fruits of our labor, and then so that our wife and our family might enjoy the fruits of our labor, and then those around us in our community that we care about. That's the way we would normally see our wealth benefiting and blessing others. And instead of any of those receiving a blessing, what we have instead is a man who is a stranger, somebody who has shot in from the side, who now enjoys this man's wealth and possessions and honor. And we're shaking our heads going, why is he here? Now, in other places in Scripture, it talks about the alien and the stranger in much more benevolent terms, people that we should care about. In this point, though, the stranger is an interloper. He has come in to take and to enjoy the wealth, all of which was the toil of another person. All right, so that also is vanity and a grievous evil. Then we have the story of a man who has 100 children. He has a long life. He has 100 children, and yet it says that at the end of that long life, he has no burial. It's a long life without being satisfied with life's good things, and he has made no impact, not on those 100 children, not on the people around him, so that his funeral, he has no decent burial. There's no one there to show respect. There's no one there to show honor. There's no one there to grieve. And so you get the picture of a man who lives a long time. Doesn't matter how long he lives. He says could be 2,000-year lives. Doesn't matter. He could father 100 children, but he has lived his life, and his life has miscarried. His life has not accomplished what was truly lasting and beneficial, so that 100 children, nobody shows up at the funeral. So Solomon says that this man, because he has no burial, no proper burial with honor and with grief, he has no rest. And so, in that sense, a stillborn baby is better than him. Now I'm going to take just a little bit of a rabbit trail. We're going to leave this story that Solomon's telling, though it is vanity and a grievous evil, because this man had great possibilities for influence and has lost all of them. His life, as I said, has miscarried, hasn't accomplished what it was designed to do. But what I want to point out is there's this interesting doctrine we don't see very much in Scripture, where we hear what happens to babies who die before they're carried to term, before they're born. And so there's one place when David prays for the life of his son by Bathsheba. If you remember that whole situation, when the baby finally dies, David says, in which it was to give him some measure of comfort, the baby will not return to me, but I will return to him. Some could say that's the grave, but there was something there that comforted David. And so this passage gives us much more of a description of what happens. It says, the stillborn baby comes and goes in darkness. He never sees the light of day. And in that darkness, it says his name is covered. I got to tell you, my family, I have one sister, but in the grand scheme of things, Mom had 7 children. I was number 5, and my sister was number 7. There was a baby in between us who lived for half a day, and he got the name Dale. But there were 4 boys born before me, born stillborn, who never, my mom didn't carry them to term, and so lost them. And they have no name, except this passage says that they are remembered by name. In darkness, his name, the stillborn child, his name is covered, which means if the mother didn't give the name, if the parents didn't give the name, God has given the name. And so in the darkness, and they never saw the light of day, they have a name, and that name is covered under the sun, but in the heavens, that name is known before God. And then this passage says that even though that stillborn child never knew anything, he has found rest in a way that the man who fathered 100 people didn't find rest. So 2 things I would say by way of encouragement, if I were speaking to somebody who had lost a child and we wondered and they were grieving the loss, we could say confidently that the child has a name. If the parents haven't given the name, the child has a name, and the child has found rest. So the same would be true of a mother whose child was aborted. There is forgiveness at the cross for the abortion, but the mother might still experience grief and loss and wonder, what about the baby that she never really knew? She can be comforted in knowing that the child has a name and that the child has found rest. So interesting, some of the implications of a simple parable about how a father of 100's life has miscarried, but is stillborn, has a name and has found the rest that the father of 100 did not find. After those 2 stories, then we have a couple of short sayings. Talks about toil for an unsatisfied appetite. Talks about a person who has learned by wisdom how to conduct themselves in whatever situation, yet there's no reward for that person because he's called a poor man. And then there is a comparison between someone who is clear-sighted and sees the danger in front of him and turns aside, or continues straight ahead by the light of their eyes, and then the person with a wandering appetite who doesn't see the trap that's coming is unable to turn aside and suffers the consequences for it. So 3 quick sayings along the way. And then chapter 6 of Ecclesiastes closes while talking about a person who would dispute with God. And whenever we think about that, we think of the book of Job and how Job said, I want to talk with God. I want to defend myself. And he pull himself up and prepare like a man who's going to wrestle God. And Solomon would say, there's no wrestling God. So here's some comments that God says about how we might dispute with him. Now I got to tell you, Job knew ultimately and finally what God was doing, and he was rewarded. But man, because of his limitations, has no ability to stand before God, has no ability to dispute with God. So Solomon says in this chapter, God knew beforehand all that has come to be and all that will be. In his providence, he knows the end from the beginning. God also knows, and we need to remember what man is, both in his glory, being made in the image of God, and in his misery of being a fallen and sinful person. God knows the limitations of man, and man cannot dispute with God. He can't just do it with strength, and he can't do it with words. You can multiply words, but basically state your case and stand silently as God answers. So God knows our days, and he knows our future, and we can rest in that thought. So we may not always understand all that's going on, not when we lose something in a bad venture, not when we lose honor or resources, or when a stranger eats our goods. We'll just stand quietly and wait for God's judgment, wait for God's mercy, and look forward with hope to our life with him. Thanks for hanging out today.